Hi everyone, and welcome to Anesthesia Coffee Break. My name is Lahir, and today we're doing live Viva Practice with Max. Now, hey Max, sorry, welcome to the podcast, and really thank you for reaching out because not many people reach out to be examined and grilled kind of in this kind of format on a podcast. And so, real kudos to you. And I think it's one of those things where, hey, you just try to get as much practice and as much experience with as many people as possible for this exam. So Max, tell us a bit about yourself, where you're working, what stage are you at, and how, briefly what how the exam was.
Okay. Well, thanks again for having me. It's just an honor to actually be on the podcast that I've been listening to for the last 9 months.
Nice.
I'm currently working at the Trove Regional Hospital. I'm the only accredited trainee there, unfortunately, at the moment. I've just finished sort of introductory time as well, and so I've been basically studying since I started January 1st. In terms of sort of how I found it written, I've
Actually, let's get
yeah.
into like what's your Viva plan now as you go into this kind of new phase.
So it's been about 4 days since the written, so I've taken just a bit of time off and you know relaxed a bit. But basically starting today, my plan is sort of, since I've covered a lot of the content, a lot of the learning outcomes,
Mhm.
and done a lot of short answer questions. I'm looking at this and I felt a bit sort of,
Mhm.
to some extent, like lost, because when you're looking for short answer question and multi-choice, you can just look at past questions and
Mhm.
use that to guide the topics and then go for the learning outcomes.
Mhm.
But so I think I'm going to do something similar. I've got organized a few vivas with some of the consultants at my hospital, including some of the ICU consultants, and with some friends who've gone through previously as well.
Excellent.
And then I've also got a study group, which is across a few different states, and where it's growing rapidly, actually, the study group. And where basically the plan is we're going to do a bit of Viva practice sort of each day, and then I'm just going to read around topics because that's the advice I was given from some of my
That's
predecessors.
that's fantastic, and I love this thing of this study group growing because I think just including people, but still having not letting anyone be left behind, having this thing where there's plenty of room for people to still be in a study group and have these. I imagine you do some things with different people, and you interchange people when they're free, but also when you get a really good Viva, you write that down and you give it to the next person, and you just pay it forward, and suddenly you've multiplied the effect of each consultant's. Probably they've given you a real Viva that has been in the exam, and now you get to do that. So I think that works really well.
Absolutely. And it's sort of a study group that's formed out of the fact that all of us in the study group had no one else to form a study group with. And so we got people in Queensland, people in South Australia, me, and we've got
How
former
did you
trainees at those.
how did you all find each other? Like, how did you meet up?
One of the trainees who used to be at my site, we did the primary course together, and then I just made a whole bunch of friends there, talked to as many people as I could, and that's when we all started meeting up. And then friends of friends started joining, and it just became this massive thing.
Okay, that's great. How many people in the group?
Currently, I think it's about 9.
Okay, good. And I know one West Australian group had everyone in the state. I think so. There must have been like 20 people or something. So again, it does work depending on how well you can organize yourselves, and just don't leave anyone behind. That's the motto. Hey, so
Yeah.
let's get started, Max. So pretty much, I'm just going to ask you questions, give me answers. We'll get you to draw some pictures later, and hopefully you can just show it up to the screen. And I'll kind of show the audience what that looks like on the YouTube channel. And yeah, we'll just get started, and then we'll give feedback at the end. So we might go for 15 minutes or so. Let's get started. Max, what is anaphylaxis?
Anaphylaxis is a dysregulated response to an antigen caused by the degranulation of mast cells, leading to a life-threatening syndrome involving sort of a distributive shock and life-threatening angioedema.
Yep. And what kind of reaction would you call this?
This is a type 1 hypersensitivity reaction.
Great. What is the main antibody involved in this?
It would be IgE.
Where's this formed?
So IgE is formed in the B cells,
B cells? Yep. What's another name for them?
plasma cells.
Cool, cool. Okay, so literally what happens in this process?
So the process starts off with exposure to an antigen or something that could resemble an antigen, such as fulminating with rocuronium. An IgE is formed to the antigen, and this binds to the Fc fragment of the mast cell. This mast cell is then sent to be primed, and it can also happen to the basophils as well. What then happens is re-exposure to the same antigen binds to this primed mast cell, and it's a process called cross-linkage, which causes uncontrolled degranulation of mast cell, releasing.
Tell me which mediators are released.
So it releases, there's early and late mediators. The early mediators are going to be serotonin, tryptase, histamine, and the late mediators are going to be prostaglandins, platelet activating factor, and leukotrienes.
Right. What does this cause?
This causes a number of problems with the system. So from the cardiovascular system, it causes widespread vasodilation, causing distributive or vasodilatory shock. It also causes, from respiratory side, bronchoconstriction and angioedema, which can cause basically obstruction in upper and lower levels, as well as urticaria and facial edema. And then it can also cause GI symptoms as well. So you get nausea, vomiting, and gastric upset.
What's the main pathology with the cardiovascular system?
The main pathology is it's going to be the distributive shock.
What does that mean? What's happening at a vascular level?
So you get a loss of your systemic vascular resistance due to vasodilation from these inflammatory mediums released.
Anything else that's happening at that
sorry, what was that?
Anything else happening at that capillary level?
Yeah, so you get a large amount of basically capillary leakage as a result of this. So you get large amounts of edema.
Anything else?
Not that I can think of at this point.
Anything else in any part of the body systemically?
So yeah, you can get the systemic rash as well.
Anything else?
You can also get an increase from the histamine, an increase in heart rate. So you get tachycardia.
Anything else?
Not that I can think of at this point.
How about clotting?
So you can get dysregulated. You can get dysregulated hemostasis as well. So you can potentially get DIC and thrombotic events.
Yeah. What happens in DIC?
So DIC is the dysregulated activation of all your clotting factors and platelets. So it consumes the vast majority of your body's ability to coagulate, and then forms these complexes which can become embolic. And then subsequently you have a hypercoagulable state. Basically you get a lack of clotting factors, and you become relatively anticoagulated.
How would you treat anaphylaxis?
So the mainstay of anaphylaxis treatment is adrenaline. This acts via the beta-2. It has multiple effects. Its main effect for treating it is acting via the beta-2 receptors on the mast cell, which stabilizes it. However, it also helps treat the bronchoconstriction, the angioedema, and also helps increase sort of cardiac output in the and also increase systemic vascular resistance in the distributive state.
How does it increase cardiac output?
It increases cardiac output by acting directly on, at low doses, acting directly on the heart's beta-1 receptors, which cause effective sort of increase in chronotropy, lusitropy, inotropy, and dromotropy.
How else does it increase the cardiac output?
It can also increase the cardiac output. This doesn't necessarily increase cardiac output, but it helps treat the shock by, at higher doses, acting on the alpha-1 receptors in the body to cause vasoconstriction and increase in systemic vascular resistance, which has mixed effects, but it does increase afterload and preload, which can help the state.
What's that anaphylactoid reaction? How does that differ?
An anaphylactoid reaction is it's not mediated by mast cells.
Are you sure?
Not so sure, but how it differs is it's very similar in origin, but it's mainly treated by it's dose dependent, and it's dependent on speed of injection of drug if it's involved in a drug.
Okay, let's change topic now. I want you to draw a CVP waveform, so central venous pressure waveform, and the corresponding ECG trace as well. Once you've done it, you can just show it to the screen.
Sounds good. This is what I've got here.
Excellent. Can you describe what you're showing there?
Yeah, so as we go across, this is a pressure over time graph in the central venous pressure. We've got the A and the C wave, the X descent, the V wave here, and the Y descent, and then we've got the P wave here, the QRS and the T. What's happening here is you've got the X wave, which happens just after the P wave, and it represents atrial contraction.
You mean the A wave?
Oh yeah, A wave. Sorry, A wave, and it represents atrial contraction.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got at the start of isovolumetric contraction, you've got the C wave, which is represents both a reflection from the tricuspid closing as well as the carotid pulsation. Then you've got the X descent, which happens roughly at the time of the early ejection phase of systole, where you've got the decrease in volume of the right ventricle reflected in the central venous pressure. Then, as you got here, you've got the V wave, which is the rapid rush of blood against the tricuspid valve whilst it's closed. And then you've subsequently got the Y descent, which is the opening of the tricuspid valve.
Yeah, excellent. So you've explained each of those parts. You can put that down now. That's totally fine. And Greenwich, I think you explained what happens at each of the points because the ECG is linked to that as well. So that's great. Can you write some values for pressure on the Y-axis?
I can. So pressure is going to roughly be between, in a normal healthy person, between 0 and 8 millimeters of mercury.
Mm-hmm.
So I will put this at 4 to split the difference of the baseline. That's sort of the main one. I'll put as 4, and I'll put maybe, so I go down to the baseline here, 2 millimeters of mercury, and maybe go up to 5 in a healthy person at euvolemic state.
Okay. Now, can you tell me what happens to the CVP trace with atrial fibrillation?
So with atrial fibrillation, you would lose your A wave as you have no clear atrial contraction. And in terms of, I think the baseline of the CVP trace may be harder to interpret as well. It's not going to be a smoother trace.
How about tricuspid stenosis?
With tricuspid stenosis, you're going to have a less steep Y descent when the tricuspid opens, and you're going to have potentially a sharper, with the atrial contraction, you're going to have a sharper spike in pressure with the A wave.
How about tricuspid regurg?
With tricuspid regurg, let me think about this for a second. I think your C wave might be more markedly elevated, and you might get a loss of the V wave, or flattening of the V wave.
How about AV dissociation?
With AV dissociation, you're going to get atrial contractions outside of normal ventricular, basically outside of your normal ventricular beats, and therefore you're going to get A waves appearing in inappropriate places or having no correlation to systole and diastole.
We'll move on to the last question we have, which will be, what's in a bag of normal saline?
A bag of normal saline is it's a liter of water which contains 154 millimoles of both chloride and sodium, which has a pH of roughly about 5.5 to 7. and a calculated osmolarity of about 308, but a measured of roughly 285 to 290, depending on the source.
Mhm. What is normal about normal saline?
Absolutely nothing.
Good. um, what's the difference between osmolarity and osmolality?
So osmolarity is number of solutes per liter, whereas osmolality is number of solutes per kilogram.
Mhm. Um, and can we interchange these? Like, why do we have these two terms?
They're not necessarily interchangeable because the various weights of the solution you're putting them in is going to be different. A kilogram of water equals a liter of water, but you're not always using water as your solvent.
Mhm. Okay. What's so this because this is a real vibe. I'm just trying to move through to the right question because you've answered some of these. In terms of measurement, how do we measure each of these?
So, in terms of osmolality is generally calculated, whereas osmolarity is measured via freezing point depression, which is a coagulative property of any fluid.
Mhm. What's another way you can calculate osmolarity?
Um, you could also check. You could also check the change in boiling point.
Mhm. Any other things methods you can use to measure?
Um, you could use it against a reference solution in a semi-permeable membrane and see the fluid shifts.
Mhm. Now tell me what are the colligative properties?
So colligative properties are properties of a solution that aren't dependent on the substance of the solution itself, but rather the amount of particles within the solution.
Mhm.
And these are boiling point, freezing point, and also saturated vapor pressure has variable properties depending, but it does actually depend on the solution's solvent, unfortunately.
Mhm. So when I add antifreeze to the car, how does that work?
So antifreeze is ethylene glycol. It's a very small particle, which, when you add to a solution, adds a large amount of solute, therefore depresses the freezing point
Mhm.
of the substance. So in the car, it depresses the freezing point of the motor fluid you're using.
Mhm. Okay. So you've increased the number of particles. Good.
Yeah.
Tell me about the anion gap.
So the anion gap is it's the gap in commonly measured or measurable anions and cations within your blood.
Oh, yeah, and
Um,
what's the formula?
so there's a couple formulas depending on whether you're not measuring for traces, but the standard one is your total amount of sodium minus your total cations, which is chloride plus chloride and you can have there's a formula that involves urea and also
What's an easy formula that you can use day to day?
sorry, I've forgotten at this point.
That's fine. What do you use it for? The anion gap.
So you mainly use the anion gap to determine the source of a metabolic acidosis, whether or not it's a high anion gap metabolic acidosis or a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis.
Mhm. And what are the what are the wide anion gap metabolic acidosis conditions?
So I use the acronym left total knee replacement. So you've got lactate, you've got toxins, including toxic alcohols such as ethylene glycol. You've got ketones, and you've got renal conditions as well.
Mhm. Excellent. Okay, Max, we're going to stop there. Well done. How did that feel?
Uh, it was a challenge. I think I have the knowledge for some of the things, but
Mhm.
in the moment, like especially, I've calculated iron gaps hundreds of times over the past 5 years,
Yeah.
6 years,
So yeah,
and in the moment,
in the moment.
completely out the window.
Um, so here is that real vibe. So this is a real vibe from one of my mates, who good Viva, because he got pretty far just like you did in this Viva. So again, I made this slightly difference in terms of the timing of everything, but I think you went really well into anaphylaxis. You give me a really nice definition, and you went to some extra details about the receptor types as well. So, that was definitely impressive to hear that stuff. So I think that was really great. Mediators, you mentioned all the right ones. You have it intermediate and late as well. That was pretty cool. All of these effects of histamine is the most important. Tryptase you mentioned, because that's obviously what we measure. Look, the thing I was pressing for was leaky capillaries. The fact that you get sudden redistribution is a big part of it. Loss of vascular volume, and that contributes to swelling as well. But you defined all the other things. A lot of people forget that anaphylaxis also involves the GI tract. In terms of the systems that it does. Many people, even before this Viva, I didn't really consider clotting one of the things that I thought about, but, in severe anaphylaxis, obviously it can happen as well. And you then got to that from first principles, which is good. You mentioned adrenaline straight away, and then we just talked about all of that, which is great. And then we went straight, I wasn't too fussed because you already mentioned basophils previously, so we didn't have to go into that. So yeah, any question about that? I think you did really well on that.
Is anaphylactoid mediated by mast cells? I forgot.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's direct. It's not IgE mediated, but it is mast cell degranulation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you're kind of right. It's more of a graded response. The more of a drug you can. Is that more of the drug? Yeah, you need direct substrate or protein or whatever it is degranulating the mast cell. So it truly is. The amount of dose you give will have a very direct effect, whereas anaphylaxis can be, dose dependent in a certain way. Like, if you do a skin prick test to a substance and it shows a big sign, you don't necessarily get anaphylaxis. So, anyway, we'll move on from there. So drawing CVP, and I might I think you explained this really well, and you pretty much got all the definition. I'm just going to deranged physiology now. Great website. I'm sure a lot of the people studying for the primary exam have heard of.
I've read the whole thing. all the primary stuff.
Exactly. Let's just get this up. So yeah, again, I think you talked about this really well. Obviously, being able to draw a picture, draw the diagram, having your axes labeled, pressure and time. And you described it as such, the P wave, then atrial contraction, then QRS complex, then the C wave of tricuspid elevation in the right atrium, followed by the downward movement, and then the V wave, which is the back pressure. And that happens after your repolarization on your T wave. And the tricuspid valve opens early and ventricular diastole, and that's your Y descent there. So all of that was good. And then, obviously a fantastic website. So, having all the different pathologies, so loss of A waves in atrial fibrillation, canon A waves if there's any kind of junctional rhythm or pacing, because obviously you don't have that coordination. And then interestingly, regurgitant CV waves in tricuspid regus, so you get this fused kind of look there. Again, I'll put the link up to derangedphysiology.com and what we're talking about here in the notes on the YouTube channel, as well as at the podcast as well. And then with tricuspid stenosis, you get prominent airwaves and reduced. So for tricuspid stenosis or reduced right ventricular compliance, pretty prominent airwaves. And that's probably what we went through. Just going to stop there and just put in what my mate put in the notes. So AF, loss of airwave, C wave prominence, he said there. Tricuspid stenosis, increased mean CVP with a narrower, taller airwave. Actually, and you said a few more things. I wasn't sure exactly if they were correct, but you did mention the narrow, taller airwave. I like the way
I was first principling a lot of that.
Yeah, and kind of that's all you got sometimes, really. Especially like once you get to that point in the Viva, obviously they're really testing. You've already passed. They're just really seeing how far you can go. Tricuspid regurg, increased V wave, and AV dissociation. But the canon A waves is kind of that term there. I think you talked about all of this really well with the normal saline, getting your the pHs right and the osmolarity right. Osmolarity versus lality is liters versus kilogram. And then, you can use an osmometer for measuring osmolality. But osmolarity, you can just calculate, sodium plus glucose plus urea. I think that was the simpler formulation that you can just approximate it with. And then colligative properties, yep, easily said that. And then talking about antifreeze, how does it work? Exactly, lots and lots of particles depresses this freezing point. And again, once you get to this point, we're just getting more and more information out of you. And yeah, I think you did that really well. Everyone's got a different mnemonic. So left-turn patient sounds great. I've got dual diabetic, uremia, lactic, and ethanol and other toxins. But those are literally the key ones that we need to think about. Good work, Max. Thanks so much for being on that. Did you have any questions about any of that?
No, not at all. Thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. It's really good practice, and it's also, as you said, if this does help people listening and watching to us, as the previous Vivas that I've listened to for your podcast have helped me, then I'll be incredibly grateful as well.
Excellent. Hey, thanks so much, Max. So we'll end it there. Hope this was really interesting and informative. Share with anyone who might be interested, especially if they're seeing their primary exams. And we'll see you all next time on the next podcast. Thanks a lot. Bye. Now, what's new with ABCs of Anesthesia is that we're forming a whole bunch of very comprehensive courses for every stage of your anesthetic journey, from medical student to procedural skills, from foundations in anesthesia, as well as really important exam lectures and clinical anesthesia courses as well.